Ready?
Ready.
C for C. T-O-B coming at you in 1, 2, 3.
Really?
You don't want to use that?
No.
Whatever. Here. Welcome to the Red Barn. I am Sam, and this is my lovely wife, Kristin. We are here to talk to you about the theology of the body. It's very exciting to have Crossroads for Christ reach out to us and invite us to be a part of the conference. And they said, hey, can you give a 15-minute talk on the theology of the body? And we were like, wow, that's really an honor. No, because you can't give a 15-minute talk on the theology of the body.
It's like 800 pages.
It's a really big topic, but it's such an important topic. So we're actually hoping that this will just kind of be like a little taste that if you've never heard of it before, it will get you interested in it, and then you can pursue it further. It's a wonderful, wonderful series of teachings that I think are very important, and we hope that you'll get that out of this today. So we don't even really know where to start because it's such a broad and big teaching. So we're just going to throw some sort of shotgun blast statements at you to begin. Because we don't really quite know. This is our best effort at a little bit of a summary, and then we're going to try to get into it from there. Okay, so here we go. What does the theology of the body tell us? Here's a list. First one, God made everything, including you, and in all of creation, the most significant thing is you.
You are made in the image and likeness of God.
God is love.
You were made by God, who is love, for love.
You consist of a body and a soul.
You are a soul.
You are a body.
The body makes the invisible visible.
And what you do with your body matters. Okay, for better or worse, that is our list that creates a sum of the theology of the body. So let's get a little bit more specific. We're going to start with the 5 W's, right?
Okay.
The who, the what, the where, the when, the why.
The wow.
The wow, the hopefully wonderful, worthwhile
wisdom
that we have here for you. Actually, let's go right into the when. Wednesdays, actually.
We'll
stick with the W.
Today's not Wednesday.
Yeah, it's Wednesdays. The theology of the body came from Wednesdays, presented by
Pope John Paul II, also known as St. John Paul the Great. If you don't know this man, I mean personally, if you don't know about him or don't know his story, you need to learn about him. So not only was he a really important figure in the church, but in the entire world. His birth name is Karol Wojtyla, and there are 2 awesome movies, both titled Karol, one about his early life and one about him as a pope, and they are absolutely incredible. This man is a saint that you want to be praying to and have in your life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that he was pope from, I think, 1978 to 2005, I think.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. Put that on the record. And so he had a really long term as pope, and I would say that during that time, maybe even you could say in like the modern age, that there are a lot of important historical people. I think he's probably the sort of like, you could say he's like the shining light of all the historical figures of this era. An incredibly positive, important person in history. So learn about John Paul II, or JP2, as he is affectionately known, right? Because we're cool, we're hip with the young people.
So young.
All right, so that's the who. The when is Wednesdays, as Pope he gave it on what they called Wednesday audiences. It's when the Pope kind of addresses the world
at the Vatican.
Wednesdays,
so that's Vatican the where. City. The where.
And that's the where. And so from 1979 to 1984, throughout his Wednesday audiences, John Paul II delivered these lectures that became this series of teachings, the theology of the body. And here we are trying to get into it. So we've got some of the W's. Now we want to get into the what and the why, kind of the important stuff, the meat of it, right? So what is the theology of the body? We tried to give you a list at the beginning. Basically, the theology of the body tells us what the human person is. Period. At the end of the sentence. It tells us what the human person is. It's not just like limited to that, but like that's the point of it. Okay. And the why? Well, I'm not sure if you've been paying attention, but maybe more than ever, you could say that things have gone a little crazy. And when I look at that, I think I see two primary concerns. I look at the world that's kind of in chaos, that's kind of fumbling around, and I see a crisis of purpose and a crisis of identity culture-wide. Who we are and why do we exist? What is our purpose in life? Is there anything significant about us or this life? And so I think that the theology of the body provides the answer to that crises that we see. And so I think maybe never more than right now, this series of teachings is crucially important. It's actually kind of an exciting time to be an informed Catholic, practicing Catholic, because we have this solution, not because we're arrogant or better than anyone, but because we have the saints and we have the divine revelation from God himself who tells us who we are at a fundamental level. The theology body takes that and presents it in a responsible, charitable, and manageable way for us to understand.
And coherent.
It's coherent.
Yeah.
It makes sense of our experience, our life experience. So if we have all these questions and we don't know who we are or why we're alive, and so many people chase different things to try and get answers to that and to cling to things, it's the theology of the body that says, no, you're grounded in these principles, and that's what gives us this clarity and charity in a time of chaos, so that we don't veer off of God's plan for our lives. So, and it sheds light on some of the most controversial issues of our time, which is what's so great, because if things are in chaos, what we need is order. So we have things that are addressed like contraception, pornography, there's the gender debate. It gives us clarity on that. Same-sex attraction is a really big topic these days. So it gives us the church's teaching on that. It reaffirms the church's teaching on all of these things, but it does so in a way that we can understand, that it makes it reasonable. So the way that I like to look at the theology body is like, I think maybe back in the day, people knew the rules of the church and they just sort of accepted them. Mm-hmm. And they maybe even just grew up that way. And it was like, it's like a child, where when a parent tells a child, no, you can't do something, the child doesn't know better. So they maybe follow the rule. They're supposed to follow the rule. Maybe. But then they grow up and they become like rambunctious teenagers, mm-hmm. right? With raging hormones. And they start to push back, right? So when the parent says, don't do this, and the kid wants to know why, right? The answer has always been, because I said so. That doesn't work anymore when you're a rambunctious teenager. Mm-hmm. So the theology of the body provides us the actual explanation. It gives us the why to the church's teachings in a way that makes sense at a higher level, right? Because now you're more mature, and the country needs it, because you can get yourself into more trouble. So right now the culture needs these answers so they can have clarity moving forward and understanding who we really are and what we're really all about. Now,
so the culture is a rambunctious teenager.
The culture is a rambunctious teenager.
Full of hormones.
Full of hormones. Because the hormone part is actually pretty key. A lot of the teachings of the theology of the body are of a sexual nature. And I've often heard the church of being accused of, being obsessed with sex. We've probably all heard that, But I would push back on that. I would say it's really more that like humanity is kind of generally obsessed with sex. It's kind of a big part of mm-hmm. the human experience. And so the church just has something to say about it. And people don't like that, because if the church has something definitive, they want to push back. But the wonderful thing about the theology of the body is that it's not just this big negative message. I think a lot of times people grew up in the church, and maybe even like a nun taught your parents, like, you can't even think about sex because it's dirty. And if you do, then you're going to suffer the fires of hell, right? Don't ask further questions. You're going to hell. That's not John Paul II's approach. He gives a much more well-rounded, explained approach, and it's all in a positive message. So it's not to say that things haven't gone off the rails. Like, one of the first things that the theology of the body does is it recognizes the brokenness of humanity, and it points out what went wrong, but then it offers a reasonable solution, a rational solution. Mm-hmm. So that explanation of what went wrong and here's the way forward is the gift of the theology of the body to this world that really needs that. It's a positive message. It tells us that our bodies and our desires, our bodily desires, are good, and it doesn't try to squash them like sex is dirty. It's not this like repressive sexual teaching that I think often gets associated with this like antiquated church teaching. No, it tells us that we have good desires, and it points out the path to fulfilling them. It tells us that we were made for love. Now that might sound sort of generic, but it's actually a profound thing for us to understand that we were made by love for love. And that is our ultimate end, right? So that we want to experience that. So it explains what that actually means and how we can get to it, how we can, in our daily lives, play that out in our daily relationships to fulfill this desire that we have for communion, that this desire we have for intimacy. All of that gets played out. And it also highlights the common pitfalls, the counterfeits of those desires, and why they will never satisfy the real, true desires that we have in our hearts. Yeah. So the ones we're really looking for that we shouldn't compromise on.
Right.
This is the gift. Much like the man who gave it to us, the theology of the body is very deep. It's profound. It's bigger than we can cover, but we're going to do our best here. So let's jump into it.
Okay. In the theology of the body, JP2 takes a deep dive into Genesis. Today, we're just going to wade in. In the beginning, we have the creation story. So God created everything, the seas, the sky, the dry land, trees, animals, all that good stuff. And he declared that it was good. But there's something different about the way he made mankind. He made us in his own image and likeness. And while you've probably heard that a lot, I wonder if you've thought it through. I think the temptation is often to look at ourselves and then to try to create God in our own image and likeness. But it's not that God has 2 arms and 2 legs and looks like us. God is spirit. It is our souls that are created in the image and likeness of God. Our souls hold some of our highest capacities, like the ability to think with our intellect, to choose with our free will. It's our soul that makes it possible for us to love. These abilities are spiritual abilities. They're not material. I can't ask you to put a handful of love in my hand. They make us like God, and they give us a dignity. We also have a body. So we're a spiritual being with a soul and a physical being with a body. We have to eat and drink and sleep and protect ourselves from wild beasts and freezing cold temperatures. They are 2 distinct things, the body and the soul, but they cannot be separated. You are your body and you are your soul. If I walked up to Sam and punched him, he wouldn't be like, hey, why'd you hit my body? He definitely wouldn't be like, why'd you hit my soul? He'd be like, why'd you hit me? They are together. They are codependent. You cannot separate the body from the soul. Sam, what happens if you separate the body from the soul?
Death.
And what's the fancy word for that? I mean, not death.
The fancy word for death is, I don't know. No, the fancy word you're looking for is hylomorphism. That is the unity of body and soul. So the Christian concept of man is that we are made up of a radical unity of body and soul. That is hylomorphism. We don't get big words like that in the barn very often.
We do not.
It's good. It's a privilege to bring that one to you here today.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, so while our culture has gone off the rails in many ways, there are still kernels of truth that can be found. One is that while we don't often give honor to the body and the soul, we do recognize that we have both. If you look at the things that terrify us. So a body without a soul, zombie. Soul without a body, ghost. Deep down in there, got some nuggets of truth. We just got to build on it.
At some level we get it, because when in the culture we separate those things, the body and the soul, they freak us out.
No. So in Latin, the word for soul is anima, which is like animate. And just go with me for a second. If you were in a hospital room with a dying person, there would be a moment when they were alive and the next moment when they are dead. And we say things like, they are gone. Their physical body is still present, but something has changed. Something is missing. The thing that animated them is no longer present. This is what John Paul II called the sacramentality of the body. The body and it alone can make the spiritual soul visible to us. So the body makes visible the invisible realities. So we have soul, which gives us dignity because it's made in the image and likeness of God. And our body has dignity because it makes the invisible soul visible to us, but also it has its own dignity because Jesus himself took on a body and saved the world in and through his body. So we are a body and we are a soul, and what we do with our body matters.
Boom. Okay, so we also learn in Catholic theology that God is love. That is our understanding, that God is love. Now think about that. That's a profound theological truth that I think doesn't get as much credit as it deserves. That means that God, his very existence is love, which means there's love happening, right? So there's a relationship. So God, it actually says in the Catechism, I think it says, God's innermost secret is that he is a communion of persons. That God's very existence is a communion of divine persons. We believe in a God that is three divine persons that make up the one God. It's bad math, don't overthink it. It's the mystery of the
Trinity.
Holy Trinity, okay?
Nailed
We
it.
believe in three divine persons, one God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, who exist in an eternal exchange of love. And the Theology of the Body from John Paul II gives us this idea that like the best example of that for us to understand it is if God is love and he is this communion of persons, then if we are made in his image and likeness, when we love well as a communion of persons, we most perfectly reflect the divine God, right? In our bodies even, right? Our body and soul unity, then in communion with other bodies and souls, right? So the idea of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in this communion of love could be played out in the family. So a husband pours out his love on his wife. The wife receives that love. She pours her love back out on her husband. And that love between them becomes so real that it has the ability to create another person, right? It's actually a life-giving love. And that's a huge part of the theology of the body, is that we seek this union, right, which is the sexual union, the marital union, which has the ability to create life, right? Life-giving love. And now we can actually probably talk about some of the differences or some of the controversial topics in the culture. For example, like contraception. John Paul II says that the body speaks a language. And when two people come together in the marital embrace, that their body is saying, I give myself to you wholly, right? In that embrace. And that contraception actually steals a part of that back. It says, I give myself to you wholly, except I withhold this part, which is this sacred life-giving piece.
Right? Or block it from you.
Yeah, or block it from
or
happening.
both, right?
Yeah. So one of the reason the church never has embraced, like the rest of the culture, this teaching or this understanding of contraception as a good is because it doesn't see it as a good. It sees it as a barrier that comes between the life-giving love, the fruitful love that man, husband, and wife were destined for. And God wants us to be open to that life, that love-giving life. So we actually see in Genesis, going back to Genesis in the creation story, it says that God, originally in the first story, it says he formed man out of dust, right? So that's like the body comes from the dust, but he breathes life into it. That's the soul, right? That God imbues a soul into the body. And then in the second creation story, we actually see that God creates man first, he creates Adam, and then he creates Eve, because it's not good for the man to be alone. We are destined to be in communion with each other. We were destined for intimacy. We were destined for love. And we see it actually in Adam. The Catechism says it like this: upon seeing Eve, Adam elicits a cry of wonder, an exclamation of love and communion. And this is before the fall. So when he looks upon Eve, he's looking upon her with an original innocence, something that's not tainted by original sin, so that he would see her and he would desire to love her for her own sake. And now, so often, the opposite of love is what happens in this culture, which is, say, a man sees a woman, and rather than desiring to love her for his own sake, for her own sake, he desires to use her for his own sake. The opposite of love is actually to use another. And that's what we find here played out in the creation story. This gift to Adam is Eve. And it says she's equal in dignity, but also distinct. His counterpart is equal, his nearest in all things.
Love that. It's
Beautiful.
My favorite line.
Absolutely beautiful.
So going back to contraception, it opens the door for use. It makes it easier to use the other for your own sake rather than to love them for their own sake. Whereas natural family planning that the church teaches keeps you in constant communication and really makes it a lot harder to use the other and makes it a lot easier to love the other as you should. It also leaves the door open for God to work in your life, for him to give you children when he has destined for you.
Amen. All right, let's jump into another controversial topic, one that we see ravaging the culture these days.
Does it rhyme with corn?
Yes, when I present it to the teenagers, I say it rhymes with corn. It's the fastest growing addiction in the United States. Rhymes with corn, pornography, is pornography, right? John Paul II had this great quote. He said, the problem with pornography is not that it shows too much, it's that it shows too little. What pornography does is that it actually separates the body and the soul. And all it does is emphasize and focus on the body, the beauty, the goodness of the body, but it completely removes the idea of the soul. And what happens when you separate body and soul? Death. Pornography is lifeless. It is sterile.
Absolutely.
Right? And it is actually, it's ravaging our culture. It's a main root cause for marriages to fail. It is having a horrible, it affects the way that we look at and have relationship with each other.
And the way we understand love.
And the way that we understand love and it distorts the way that we see each other.
If you see that as love, then you're seeing use as love. You have completely flipped them. And also it is infidelity if you are in a relationship.
It's infidelity.
Pornography and marriage go together like
oil and water.
Or
fire and ice.
Or
trees and campers.
We have an image for that?
We do. We have an example of that. Yeah.
So pornography takes all the emphasis off of the soul and puts all of the emphasis onto the body. In our culture, there's a lot of things where we put all of the emphasis on one or the other. And anytime you separate is death.
Yeah, to a certain degree. I mean, it's indignifying to the human person, right? So if you focus on one more than the other, you're neglecting a part of what makes the human person human.
Right. So it certainly doesn't make you happier.
Right. Yes. Pornography correlates with more depression. It doesn't actually fulfill the desire that is truly there, which is one of union.
Right. It's the counterfeit.
It's the counterfeit. It's a perfect example of the counterfeit. But yeah, anything in the culture where the body is actually, it's kind of no wonder we're in chaos, right? We look at the body, certain people worship it and idolize it, and then other people hate it. I remember hearing a few years ago, there was a survey, a one-question survey for women. And it asked them, what do you see when you look in the mirror? And the number one response was flaws, right? So we believe that the woman was God's final creation, his final masterpiece, the most beautiful thing in the universe, right? The crown of creation. Looks in the mirror and doesn't see beauty, only sees flaws. No wonder we're a mess, right? So we have this idea where people pour themselves into the body, whether it's exercise or diet, all these things, because they either worship it or hate it or both at the same time. And then we have, a couple instances where people over spiritualize things to the neglect of the body. So for example, you may have a perfectly good body and someone looks at it and says, that's not who I really am. And again, that would be more this concept of there's a spiritual side of me that represents more of me than the body. The church says that the theology of the body says the radical union of body and soul are codependent and co-dignifying. Neither one can be ignored or neglected in any way.
I think we've used up our time.
Yeah.
We may have gone over our time.
Okay. So we hope that has at least, I think we're out of time. So we hope that has at least given you a little taste of the theology of the body, something that might spark your interest and get you to learn a little bit more about both John Paul II and his teachings of theology of the body. George Weigel, Catholic author, famously said, the theology of the body is like a ticking time bomb set to go off at some point during this century. And he said it will have a dramatic consequence on the culture, could even change the way that we practice our faith entirely. I think the bomb has gone off. When you look at the culture and the focus on the body and the confusion that we see, the theology of the body gives us that clarity in a charitable, meaningful way. and can give us everything that we need. We're going to finish up with a little story that we think really kind of wraps it all up. There's a story about a bishop long ago in the city of Antioch. His name was Bishop Nonus, and he was teaching a group of brother bishops, and at that point where they were, a famous prostitute walked by that was an attention grabber, scantily clad, as they say, and all of the bishops turned away. They knew that they would be tempted to look at her with lust, and so they turned away, except for Bishop Nonus. He looked at her intently, and I guess he started to weep or something. But as she passed, he asked his brother bishops, who had all looked away. They said, he said, "Did you not delight in her great beauty?" And he says, "I certainly did." And they were all like, embarrassed, like we can't look at her, we can't do that. But he said, I certainly delighted in her beauty, And, we think about that story. We ask the question, who did the right thing? And the answer to that is that they all did. Bishop Nonus, he didn't have to turn away. The other bishops knew their weakness. They knew their brokenness. They knew that if they looked at this woman, that they would be tempted to lust after her, tempted to use her. But Bishop Nonus had developed his understanding of the human person and his love for the human person beyond just the body, but he saw that radical union of body and soul. He loved her for her own sake. And he saw this woman who was only focused on her appearance, only focused on her body, and he wept for her. He beheld that beauty without the desire to use, maybe like Adam did in the garden when he first beheld Eve in that original innocence before the fall. And so it's just kind of a great story to wrap it up. This is what we're striving for, that recognition of that unity of body and soul so that we can see the entire person made in the image and likeness of God. The sacramentality of the body that makes the invisible soul visible.
And that Bishop Nonus is now called Saint Bishop Nonus. And he preached while she was walking by about this great dignity she gave to her body, and she overheard him, later came and sought him out, converted, and is also now known as Saint Pelagia.
Saint Pelagia, the harlot.
Or the penitent,
or the
depending on where you read
Saint
about
Pelagia.
her. But how beautiful that him being able to look at her him being able to look at her and give dignity to her changed her life.
And imagine, men, if we could look at all the ladies in our lives and the way that we look at them would have the power so that they would know they are more than just their bodies, which some of them only see flaws, right? To lift them up in their dignity, in their beauty, meaning the whole person. That's certainly what we're striving for here. And if only our culture could learn that message, that is the gift of the theology of the body. We have the privilege, the honor, as Christians today in a broken world, crumbling world, to be the light of Christ, to shine that message given to us by John Paul II to the world. So we're going to wrap it up with this little quote that I think summarizes the whole thing. I think I'll write it on the screen so that you can see it. But the way it goes is, the vocation of every man is the dignity of every woman. And the calling of every woman is the integrity of every man. We were made for communion, right? So we lift each other up. Because otherwise... Oh.
Okay. Ready? Okay. Want to pick your nose and then start talking or something?
No.
You're good?
No, yeah, I picked it already.
Okay, good. Okay.